look, we've got people coming in. We also have this little number coming in down the bottom, and that's all very exciting because that means that that's more people coming in to watch us. So, hi guys, this is Deanne and Shayla. Thanks for joining us for our little webinar today. We are going to give it just a few minutes to make sure that everyone can join us. If I can just get one of our awesome attendees to pop a little thing in the chat or the Q&A to let us know that you can hear us and see us okay, that would be great. And I think I don't know if Beck's actually set up, oh, if she has. Q&A, what have we got? Oh, hi, Christina. Yes, you can see us and you can hear us. I wish I could share the screen. That's okay. We'll use the Q&A. Thanks, Chris. If I could share this screen, Christina, you could take over this webinar. Excellent. And Nick, thank you. I'm not sure Becca set up my PowerPoint presentation in the back, so this is all going to be very entertaining because those of you who have done my webinars before know that I am the most technologically challenged person on the planet. So we're just going to give it a minute or so, and I'm going to make sure my screen is up and running. I'm messaging Beck from this room to the other room to make sure she can come in and set up my screen. I know this stuff. I don't know this stuff. Technology. Strong suit. No.
That's where Nick should take over.
That's it. We could just sit back and let Nick and Christina take over. Okay, awesome. Because I'm pretty sure it's in this share screen here thing, but if I tap that, we're going to find out. It is this one, I'm sure. So we're going to go share, and I'm going to start my slideshow. Beck is like, I said, did you set up our screen? And she said, no, I thought you did. So we're clearly doing this really well from beginning. I'm not printing. I'm doing. I think I did it.
I might have figured it out. I figured it out.
Excellent.
See, you got faith in yourself. Oh, look at you go.
I know, but I think there's the animations.
Keep clicking through.
Yeah,
there you go.
But I just don't want it to start yet.
Rightio.
Okay. All right. I think now that we've got.
I'd just like to say I was on my lunch when you contacted me, Dee.
That isn't the right one. We see it. Can you all see this PowerPoint presentation except the animations? Probably going to annoy me, but that's okay. We can work with technology. Can you all see that screen which says right to disconnect? Let's have a look. Yep, all good here. Fantastic. Awesome. All right, well, what we might do is get started because I'm aware, obviously, everybody's running on a tight time frame. We've got so much to do, so much to see and get done in a very short amount of time. So welcome. My name is Deanne. You've probably seen me on some of these webinars before, but I would like to take this opportunity to introduce you to Shayla. Shayla is one of our newest recruits here at the HRD team. And how long have you been here now?
5 months.
5 months and not one single grey hair. Hey.
I don't know. I haven't checked today.
Not today? Okay. So Shayla's joined us 5 months in. Just tell us how do you think you're going with HRD?
Good, I think. Every day is different. Everything's interesting. So many different industries and clients to deal with. And yeah, I think it's going really well.
Awesome. Shayla has got a super skill set in terms of rates, calculations, contracts, all sorts of stuff. So like if you've got rates questions, give her a call. She'd love to hear from you. So today we're going to take just a little bit of your time to talk about something that I think has just been floating around the internet for a while, which is this right to disconnect. And there is so many stories, challenges. But I don't understand why you're giving me a post-it note, but that's okay. Let's go. What we're going to be talking about is right to disconnect. So what this means is a new piece of legislation that is coming into effect. I can't do animations. I'm so sorry. Somebody else take over the technical element of a PowerPoint slide. We're going to start properly soon, I'm sure. Okay, so start again, Deanne. Let's go back and start from scratch. Hi, Shayla, how are you? We're here to talk about right to disconnect. Okay, I don't know about you guys, but I have been completely overwhelmed and bombarded with all of the changes that are coming through in the industrial relations and HR space. It just seems to be every time I open my email, there's something new. Every time I think I know something, something's changed. So, and if I feel that and I'm working in an environment that deals with this stuff every single day, I can't even begin to imagine how that feels for small business owners and our clients that are working through not only running their business and trying to keep their business profitable and sustainable, but then having to navigate everything that's coming through. So straight off the bat, we don't have all of the answers right now. This is a new piece of legislation. There's a lot of theories. There's a lot of thoughts and opinions. And as we navigate through, leading up to the 26th of August, which is when this piece of new legislation becomes, I guess, in effect or lawful, we're going to have a lot more case history. We're going to have a lot more trials and tribulations that we can learn from. So I just want to say right off the bat that this, where we're starting, is what we know now. All right, that is going to change as we get test cases, case history, precedents, as we sort of work with the actual legislation. So 2 important dates for you guys to remember. One is the 26th of August 2024, not that far away. Large businesses, so anybody with 15 or more employees, that's your start date. For small businesses, you get a little bit more time. So if you have less than 15 employees, you get August 2025, okay? Which, yes, worst thing you could probably do is go, yes, I've got another 12 months, put it in a drawer and forget about it, because I think that that's going to come around quicker than what you know. And if we start making steps to address what this right of connect thing is now, you're probably going to be better placed. Also, your employees typically are not going to be aware of those dates, and they're not going to be aware of the differentiation between small business and large business, and one having a start date earlier than the other. So your employees have probably got an expectation that this is going to be probably part of the legislation sooner than it might be if you are a small business. What does it mean? What do you think it means?
I guess just putting in different parameters for contacting employees outside of business, and both ways, employers and employees, just having that contact outside work hours.
Yeah, simple as that.
I think so.
Yeah, it sounds easy. I actually think that this is probably something that has got a lot of media hype, and is potentially being made to be more complicated than it is. That's just my observation just at this point in time. And I obviously stand to be corrected as we go through, the next couple of months leading into this new piece of legislation. In a nutshell, it means that the employees have a right to refuse contact after their work hours. And I guess some would say, don't they have a right to refuse it now? And I think, yeah, they technically do. But there are some sectors that it's going to be, I guess, more of an impact than others. And those sectors are likely to be those ones that are operating 24 hours a day, 365 days a week. Those sectors or organisations that may have international companies that may impact what their contact hours is. I think it's going to force us to actually look at when we operate our business. We're going to go through some topics, questions, conversation today, and we're also going to go through some of the number one myths that I've heard through the lead up to this legislation, and try and dispel some of those for you. So let's keep going. Oh, look at you go. All right, next slide, Shayla. Okay, so let's start looking at some myth busting. Employers can no longer contact employees after official work hours. Truth or myth?
Myth.
Myth, correct. It does not mean that you cannot contact employees. The key thing, if you can take away one thing from this webinar today, this is all about the employer's expectation on the employee to respond. In a nutshell.
Pretty simple.
You can contact employees after hours, you can, but it's whether or not the employee has an understanding of if there is an expectation to respond. How many times do I email you after hours, Shayla?
Hit and miss.
Oh,
you know,
come on, be honest now.
not that often, but every now and again.
Every now and then. And do you think that you have an expectation to reply straight away if you receive an email at 9 o'clock at night?
In this workplace, no, but I know in other workplaces, it can feel like the expectation to respond straight away.
Yeah, okay. How do you think that feeling gets there?
I think it's just the management styles and the way the businesses are run. So obviously you've got your regular business hours, but if something is more pressing, perhaps you feel like you need to respond straight away to give that person an answer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, okay. So essentially, let's go, the myth, it does not mean that you cannot contact employees after their working hours. What is key here is actually establishing A, what is reasonable, and I hate that word because everybody's definition of reasonable is different, but B, what are the expectations? You know, if we're looking at environments there, we have employees that are on call, or we have employees that are offered regular shifts, you know, they might be casual, they might be part-time, there might be the opportunity to pick up shifts, etc. Then there's a reasonable expectation that those offers of contact will be made after hours, right? The key comes down to telling the employee that this is how the structure works, right? So if they're on call, there is a reasonable expectation that they will be contactable. They will pick up and they will respond. That's what you're paying them to be on call for.
Yep.
The other is if there is potentially like a shift, for example, that you're going to farm out, and you could be farming it out at 2 a.m. in the morning. Right? It is then up to the employee whether or not they actually pick up the phone and accept that shift, or they don't answer the phone and they don't accept that shift. All of these sorts of things are still normal business practices and still will be allowable under the right to disconnect. Okay, managers will still be able to, or employers, contact employees after hours. But it is really important that very clear guidelines on expectations to respond are in place. That gets a little bit grey, a little bit messy when you're talking about salaried employees, because what is reasonable? What are their contact hours? What's the expectation? More often than not, most of this stuff is about having a conversation.
It's just about setting the expectations and making sure everyone's aware. That's
exactly right. All right, so that's myth number one. What's myth number two? It only applies to employers. Truth or myth?
Myth.
Myth. Why?
Because employers have a right to disconnect as well as employees. So it should be reciprocal. It should go both ways.
Absolutely. So this, I think, is probably one of the biggest parts of this legislation that has the potential to actually be a benefit to employers. Not to say that the whole thing is not a benefit. I mean, I'm a firm believer in work-life balance, and I'm a firm believer in employers and employees having expectations that are reasonable so everybody's on the same page and being able to disconnect from work. I can't tell you, I guess, probably how many times I've been involved in conflicts and workplace disputes that involve employees bombarding other employees with contact after hours, or employees bombarding the employer with contact after hours, expecting there to be a rectification response or something like that. Right? So it does work in reverse. Right? That is a little bit harder to enforce. I'm not completely naive, but there is then the ability for, in establishing what your process is and potentially having a right to disconnect policy, being able to put in some firmer framework around employee to employee contact or employee to employer contact, because it is not a one-way street. All right, and that's really important. All right, myth number 3. Only employees can lodge a complaint. We've got some other information under there which we'll go through, but truth or myth?
Truth.
Oh. Myth. So if we go back to myth number 2, it only applies to employers. Of course. So there's been, I guess, probably the misconception that employees can lodge complaints, or they can lodge grievances about right to disconnect. An employer can also lodge a complaint or a grievance. And I can see all the people in the audience going, and who do we lodge a grievance with? Who's going to come in and support us? Essentially, it's the same as the employee. which is same process, you know, but the employer can lodge a claim with the Fair Work Commission. I've never seen it done before, so I am quite excited to actually see that done. If anybody wants to volunteer and be a guinea pig, I'll help you out with that. Because if an employee is breaching the right to disconnect, then the employer can essentially apply for what we would call, it's the same process as a stop bullying order through the Fair Work Commission. I don't know what they're going to call it yet. It might be stop connect.
Stop contact.
Could be. Maybe they could be debating right now about what they're going to call this and coming up with some you know, catchy little tune. But the employer can lodge that claim with the Fair Work Commission if they feel that they are being subjected to an employee that is in breach of the right to disconnect. Having said that, you're going to need to demonstrate that you've got policies, you've got procedures, you've got expectations that are set. So there's still an onus on the employer at the get-go. But if the employee doesn't want to play the game, there is a possibility for the employer to do that. It could also then be employee to employee. You know, or employee to contractor potentially, because this legislation does not apply just to employees and employers, it applies to third parties. And that is then obviously another element for your business if you need to consider the intervention of third parties. Do you have customers that are contacting you at 3 p.m. on a Sunday wanting you to have a resolution by Monday? Do we need to be setting expectations with our customers right from the get-go so that they're aware of what the response timeframes are or when they can reasonably expect a response? So that's something to keep in mind as well. We have got some information there on the slide. This gets pretty hefty stuff though. Maximum penalty for employers who breach a stop order is $18,000 for an individual per contravention. All right, and $93,000 per contravention for a company or employer. So I think maybe I have a typo there. That's meant to be employee, but again, the Fair Work Commission being able to put a substantial fine on an employee, I don't believe that's actually going to happen. So it may be part of the legislation, but I don't believe that that's probably going to be enforceable. However, were you going to say something?
But they're not going to go straight to Fair Work if they have that issue, are they?
Well, look, that depends. From an employer's perspective, no, I don't think that, you know, if there was an issue where the employer believed an employee was breaching a policy or guidelines, they're more likely to start potentially like a disciplinary type process or a performance improvement process about educating the employee that, hey, it's not okay. This is what we need you to do. So unlikely. An employee going straight to Fair Work is possible. Absolutely. The Fair Work Commission is, of course, going to say, what have you done? Or, you know, how have you raised this with your employer, and get the evidence to be able to make an order. But it has been done before. Hasn't been very successful. Because there's been no attempt at sort of reconciliation or addressing the matter at a local level. So usually the Fair Work Commission will say, go back and start again and come back to me with
when you've gone through the steps.
Okay. I think I'll bring in another sort of term that has been floating around and is one of those hot topics, is we do need to consider the whole right to disconnect, the whole right to work-life balance, all of those things, and how that aligns to our obligation to manage psychosocial hazards. So the managing psychosocial hazards, the code of practice, which I'm sure all of you have heard about and have probably gone, don't even know what that is. We have an obligation to manage those psychosocial hazards, and that includes overwhelming workload. You know, that includes bullying, harassment, all of those things. So this is just another tool in the tool belt for employers and workplaces to be able to demonstrate that we are trying to do the best that we can. We're taking reasonable steps and reasonable precautions to make sure that our employees and our workplace is safe. All right, so when we're coming to do the risk assessment for psychosocial hazards, how are we managing workload? Okay, one of the things we're doing is we have a right to disconnect policy, and we have procedures in place to allow people to disconnect from the workplace. It's a positive, proactive step. So it's like we've got all of these legislation changes, right, have just been like this giant jigsaw that's been thrown onto the table.
And it's your job to figure out where it goes.
And now that we're working with them, we're like, okay, well, that, corner piece links to this bit, and then that links to this bit, and we're starting to get the picture. All right. So we don't look at these changes in isolation. So we're not just looking at right to disconnect as right to disconnect. Yes, that's the topic of conversation, but we also then need to consider how it fits in with our obligations in some of these other changes that we're also being forced to consider. Okay, so it's almost like 1 and 1 equals 2, and that's a good thing. We also need to be mindful of discrimination. And look, don't get me wrong, I work in an environment that is more often than not conflict related. I do a lot of workplace investigations, I do a lot of fair work matters, and I know that it's easy for employees just to say something because they can. Doesn't mean it's right, doesn't mean it's accurate or truthful, but you can say it, and once it's said, the employer then has to defend it. Do I agree with it? No, but that's a whole other conversation, not for public debate. So discrimination, you need to be careful that you are not treating people differently because they've exercised a right to disconnect. So what this could look like, all right, is, Shayla, let's just say you've exercised your right to disconnect, and you have established your boundaries and your expectations with your supervisor, in that you don't answer emails after hours. You've got set availability that you come in, and when you're here at work, you're 100% here at work. Productivity is great, performance is great, awesome. Okay, so then me, for example, may have, I don't really mind answering an email at 9 o'clock. I can choose to, if I don't, I don't, but I can choose to, because I have a preference that if I get rid of that email, it's less for me to do in the morning. So I don't mind doing it. So I can choose to do that. The choice is still there, all right? And that's a fundamental thing that we are going to talk about. The choice is still there. But let's just say Phoebe, our illustrious leader, she may go, look, all right, for example, there's the RE State Conference that's happening here in Cairns. They may be asking themselves the question, who do we send? And if Phoebe said, oh, look, we'll get Dee to go because she just gives that little bit of extra effort. All right, that's if she's basing that extra effort on the fact that I answer emails at 9 o'clock, that's not okay. Like, that doesn't create a fair playing field. And that could be then seen by you potentially as being treated differently because you've chosen to disconnect.
Exactly.
All right, so we need to be mindful that we are not making decisions or treating individuals differently because they have chosen the right to disconnect.
Yeah, of course. Okay,
it's not as though you have, as an employee, need to walk out of the office at 5 o'clock every day going, I'm choosing the right to disconnect. You can if you want, that's fine, but I think there needs to be an overarching understanding.
Definitely. That's back to communication again, more than anything.
Absolutely, absolutely. All right, myth number 4, let's have a look. It's the death of flexibility. Truth or myth? Myth? Why do you think? Because I think there's probably about maybe 30 odd people probably that are listening to this that are disagreeing.
Well, I mean, the example you just gave is a perfect example. Like, you've still got your working hours, but if you choose as an employee to answer calls or emails outside of that time, that's your choice, which means you still have that flexibility available.
Yep. I sort of liken this to an employee, sorry, I got hiccups now, an employee who chooses, AKA, not to take a lunch break.
AKA. We don't talk about that.
We don't talk about that.
No.
So is there any difference between me saying, hey, Shayla, you need to take a break. It's probably not a good idea to eat your lunch at your desk every day. Just take a walk around the block, whatever you like. We encourage people to take their breaks. If I could regularly see, like the other night when I may have chipped you when we were out singing in the choir, and I noticed that Shayla was checking her work emails. I think it was like 8 o'clock on a Sunday night. And I may have raised that with you in terms of, there's no requirement for you to do that.
Exactly.
So where we have employees who are choosing to engage in communication, that's okay, but it's helpful for the employer to check in. If they can see that there's all these emails coming through at 9 o'clock, or, you know, there's these bits of work that are appearing that appear to have been done after hours, it's good business sense to check in with the employee and say, hey, what's going on? You know, is this something that you're choosing to do? Is this something that you feel you have to do? Is this something that you cannot physically get done? Because if we tie it back to the psychosocial stuff and your obligations to have a reasonable workload management, work-life balance, fatigue management, you know, we want to be preventing things like fatigue, burnout. You know, all of these things are connected. Okay, so certainly it is not the death of flexibility. An employee can still choose. You can have all of your individual flexibility agreements in terms of maybe people working from home. Yeah. That, you know, like if I work from home, I love working from home because I can sit and do Teams meetings in a very nice top in my pajama bottoms.
No one knows.
No one except now. That's all right. What, you know, I have no issue with getting on and sort of, you know, doing emails and starting work at 7:30, and then at, you know, 9 o'clock I might go and put a load of work on. Exactly. And go back to, and I'm still being very productive and still getting all the outcomes done, but I may not be doing sort of, you know, the whole office opening hours. I can still choose to do that. Okay, but it's about then having the expectation of what the employer knows that I'm doing. Because where there's a miscommunication or an absence of clarity, how is the employer meant to know when it's reasonable for to contact you, or when should they not contact you after hours, or when should they be mindful of the fact that you may not respond? You know, and if an employee is choosing to vary their hours and are always up and down, maybe there needs to be a system in place where, you know, the employee is maybe sending an email saying, okay, logged off for the night. I don't know. But it is very much a two-way street. And I think there does need to be a fair amount of conversation that happens between the employer and the employee to establish the guidelines. Definitely. Cool. That's my myths. Do we have any questions about the myths so far? I'm going to have a look here in the question and answers. If you've got any questions that you want me to answer sort of now, we're not finished the topic of conversation, obviously, but sometimes prompting for questions halfway through is a good idea. So we'll keep an eye on the little Q&A box. If you've got a question, pop it in there and we will answer that for you. Otherwise, we will start to look at, I'm so glad you're here. You're much better at technology than I am. So much better. I think that's a generational thing. Maybe. All right, so what do we need to do? Let's talk about this sort of in practical sense. We need to be conducting an audit of our sort of current work hours, determine what are our contact hours. You know, for HR Dynamics, it's pretty easy. Flexible. We are flexible, but we have a pretty much a common understanding that our contact hours are from around 8 to 5:30 or 6. Okay, that's a reasonable contact period. We also sort of articulate that to our clients and our customers via our website. You know, there's all of these things that then become information sources about clarifying what our contact hours are. Okay, and then can we stick to those contact hours? How do we communicate that to people? We really need to assess the necessity of emails on personal devices. You know, is it a requirement? Do employees have the ability to opt in and opt out? Is there an expectation? Again, this is going to come down to assessing whether or not people need to be part of an on-call system, whether there needs to be a roster shift notification thing. There might be an app, you know, that some organizations use connected to their payroll system that farms out any vacant shifts. You know, do we actually need to have those things on personal devices? And if the answer is yes, do we have the guidelines around it? Okay. Adopt a process for on-call if you need people to be contactable for after-hours periods. So this is if you absolutely 100% need them to pick up the phone, you know, or pick up an email. This is why some awards have an on-call system. You might be in an industry that doesn't have an on-call system in the award. Doesn't mean that you can't create one. You know, this is where individual flexibility does come in. Or again, what is establishing the guidelines? What are the expectations? You know, I can see, you know, we've had calls come into the office, and you've probably had them as well, where, oh no, they just take the phone home, and if it rings, they answer it.
Yeah, but what about their personal life?
What personal life?
Well, what if they want to go out to dinner?
Do
they still have to answer?
I don't know.
Are they being compensated?
I don't know.
That's something I guess the employers will have to think about.
That's exactly right. So it's re-looking at your expectations. You know, what are you expecting the employees to do? Is it fair? Is it reasonable? Are the employees being adequately compensated for it? You know, is it fair and reasonable that an employee would have, you know, a phone attached to their hip that they have to answer 7 days a week?
I don't think so.
Yeah. It may very well be that there's an arrangement between the employer and the employee that they are provided with all of these other things in compensation for the fact if the employee agrees to that. In that case, is it reasonable?
Then it might be more reasonable. It's just about that communication. And I guess reasonable is the key word here in the definition. And every workplace is going to be different. What's reasonable for us might not be reasonable for another client.
That's it. And it may actually even vary from employee to employee. So if you have got, you know, for example, I'm at a stage in my life where my children are adults and self-sufficient. I don't have to worry about school drop-offs anymore. I don't have to worry about sports days, book week, all of that.
Sick.
Yeah, all of those things. Whereas we have some people in the office who have very young children. You know, so their ability to be able to, their definition of reasonable is going to be very different to mine.
Yeah.
Right. And again, it's an open conversation. Okay. If you have on call, if that is part of your workplace arrangement, it needs to be dealt with in your contracts of employment. All right. That's where you start setting the expectations. If you are an environment that works with you know, being able to offer shifts 7 days a week, etc., that needs to be in your contracts of employment. This is how we will contact you. Right? So that's going into the next point about defining reasonable out of hours communication. So that could be shift changes, work locations. It would be reasonable for the employer to notify employees out of hours, hey, the cyclone took out our front door and our power. We don't actually have a workplace today, so don't come in. Okay, that is all reasonable communication. All right, the next one is ensuring managers lead by example in after hours communication habits. Right, and this is where we were talking about before. Nick is going to do a little snip of, you know, just little tricks. You know, how do we actually schedule an email? So there's a big difference between me sitting there, you know, watching MasterChef or whatever it might be on TV, going, oh, I'm just going to, I forgot to ask Shayla that, so I'm going to type an email. Yep, I have no expectation that Shayla is going to respond to it, but I need to get it from here out. I need to get it off my plate so it doesn't keep me awake at night. And the easiest way for me to do that is to discharge that information. So the difference then may be, instead of hitting send right then and there, I can schedule an email to go, okay, cool, I'm going to schedule that for 8 o'clock. Don't ask me how to do that. I don't know how to do that, but we're going to find out how to do that.
That's why Nick's going to help.
That's right. So it's little tips and tricks that you can do as a manager to go, right, I'm going to lead by example here. You know, and I also think it's really healthy for what leaders to be able to at least appear that they also have disconnected, even though that may not be the case. Where your employees can see that a leader has disconnected and has, you know, is going home and is not either responding to their emails, etc., it starts to foster the culture that it's okay, you know, that we don't have this expectation, you know, that you're talking about. Right? Maybe you do need to do a culture check with your team about how they think the expectation sits at the moment. Maybe it's time we do an employee survey or something like that, where we're actually weeding in some of these questions about, you know, how do we feel about after hours contact? Do we have the right balance at the moment? Yes or no? What needs to be improved? Maybe that's one way we can actually ask, because the biggest mistake I think we can make is making an assumption.
Never assume.
because we're going to get it wrong. You know, we can say, oh, there's no expectation for the employees to respond to the after hours contact. Go and ask the employee and they can have a very, very different perspective. Okay, so we need to ask the question. I guess meaningful consultation is a part of a good team culture, and being able to have those conversations and hear opinions that may be contradictory to our own or different from our own, and still being able to appreciate that that's an opinion of that individual. Okay, establish guidelines for expectations of out of hours replies and engagement. And that can be as simple as you might have a right to disconnect clause in your employment contracts. You could have a right to disconnect policy section in your employee handbook. You don't need to have war and peace, but you do need to be able to give some guidelines as to when out of hours contact might be required.
Just little sprinkles here and there to make it clear.
Sprinkles, yes, little sprinkles. And that ties into the last bit there of review employment contracts to include right to disconnect guidelines, address the shift offers. You know, if you are maybe in your casual clauses, it may be that, you know, you may be contacted outside of your ordinary working hours to be notified of available shifts. As a casual employee, you don't have to accept. Could be the same for your part-timers as well, particularly like in hospitality maybe, or disability, aged care, any of those environments where part-timers sort of may pick up extra shifts. They don't have to, but they might like to be considered for it. And I think that's probably a good point, actually. That might come back into that discrimination thing about if an employee exercises their right to disconnect and says, I do not want to be contacted for other shifts. They can do that, yeah, they can do that. But then if they want to then lodge a complaint to say that they believe they're being treated less favourably,
that's the grey area.
That's the grey area, but it also then comes back to the employee being in breach of the right of disconnect or misusing the right of disconnect procedures and guidelines, and essentially not acting in good faith. Right? So I think we're going to see these morphs come out and a bit of a morph in conflicts, because I think employees have probably got a little bit more to lose in this than employers, because most of this stuff, you know, when we talk to clients, we already seem to be doing it. We just don't have it maybe documented, or it's not reflected in a contract of employment, or it's not reflected in the employee handbook or the policy, or it's not reflected in like our performance review discussions, you know, saying, you know, how are you going with your work-life balance? How are you going with after hours contacts, and asking all of the questions. We're sort of already doing it. Same as sort of managing those psychosocial hazards. We're already doing it.
Just documenting it.
Yes.
Making it clear.
And putting a label on it.
Making it clear.
Yeah. Okay. We do have some questions. I'm banned from touching the computer because it just doesn't end well. All right, we're going to check our little Q&A box here. So let's scroll down. Would leading by example minimize the risk under a psychological hazard? Yes, if you can demonstrate that you are leading by example. All right, so if you can then provide evidence to say that, you know, it's easy for an employee to say, oh, my manager contacts me after hours all the time. And then we go back through the evidence to say, well, no, they're not really doing that because that manager's leading by example. So will it help minimize the risk? Yes, I believe it will, in the, you know, depending on what sort of complaint is actually lodged. So, and also when you're looking at minimizing risk, not just in relation to right of disconnect, but if you're looking at it in terms of the whole psychosocial, the whole workplace health and safety thing, if you can say that this is what our leaders do and they actually live by that, I think that's probably going to go a long way. Definitely. Yeah, cool. All right, in the context of a casual home care remote, now we get into the good questions. This is good. How can we ensure they read newsletters or important communications? Should we allow paid time for these communications to be read and reviewed each week? All right, so in the context of a casual home care or remote worker, so these would be people that don't maybe go into a workplace, that have either go to, I'm assuming, you can correct me if I'm wrong, they're either working from home full-time or they may be working at a participant's house or premises and going in and providing services, so they may not actually go to a depot or an office. So if that was the case, what you've suggested, absolutely, a paid time for them to do that. Also a read, if particularly if it's done by email, and you can do like a read and,
Read
read receipt, so that you've got the evidence to say that they are doing it, because if it's a mandatory content, it should be done on paid time. If they're not doing it and they're not submitting the read receipts and they're not, acknowledging, yes, they've done those, then we've actually got a disciplinary issue. So whilst, yes, you could be making sure that you're getting your mandatory content read by giving them this window of time to do it, you're holding them accountable for doing it because you're wanting evidence to say that they have done it. You're going to have much more control over enforcing the fact that they got it, they read it, they understood it, they still did the wrong thing. So what action are we going to take, versus expecting an employee to read it in their own time? Because if you expect an employee to read it in their own time or after work hours, you lose control over the enforceability of that information, because it would be unreasonable for, the Fair Work Commission would say it'd be unreasonable for the employer to expect that an employee actually did that if they weren't being paid for it. So I think that's a really good idea. You got any other ideas for that one?
I think it's just also how often, you're not going to expect them to be reading something half an hour extra every single day. Like if you've got enough content that it's a concern, perhaps setting a specific, time or day or something as kind of like a PD space for them to be allocated to be able to read and absorb that information and communication potentially as well. Maybe, especially in that space. I know there's lots of different changes that are happening in the home care and disability sort of space as well. So
yeah. You also have in social and community services, there's also the remote work provision in the award, which does allow you to pay for remote work in blocks of 15 minutes. So it may be a conversation that if there's no time to do it during the day, that they have to do it, and they have to do it prior or after a start time within reason. Like, we don't expect them to do it at midnight, etc. Maybe unless they're on a sleepover and they've got nothing else to do. But no, they should be asleep.
That's right.
It could be an awake.
Go have that 8-hour gap.
It could be an awake shift.
That's right.
Okay. So now we're just looking for options. But you could be able to maybe bring that remote work clause if that is the applicable award for your workplace.
Wonderful.
All right, so let's have a look at where it goes wrong. And I think we may have already spoken about this sort of stuff. So where it's going to go wrong. There is a lack of disconnection guidelines for staff. So we don't establish the ground rules. All right, so we let the employee or the workplace culture, which may not be that great, establish what those guidelines are. So in those thoughts of where the employees felt that they had to respond, that's the culture that's driving that.
Definitely.
So if we haven't done any clarification or expectations, that culture is just going to run away with itself, and it's going to then dictate what the employees feel they need to do rather than being told.
Leads back to lead by example.
Yep, absolutely. All right, so where will it go wrong? Staff responding after hours without set expectations. So if you don't set those expectations, and your staff, again, it ties back into the previous one, if your staff feel they have an expectation, it's going to go wrong. All right, that's not to say, like here, even in the work that we do, every now and then, not all the time, we get a very time-sensitive matter that needs to be dealt with. And I think we're actually quite good at it, even before this whole right to disconnect thing came in, where we're saying, I might be saying to Shayla might be saying to me, Phoebe might be saying, look, we've got this stuff. This is probably going to happen on Sunday because this is when the employee's next working. Are we okay to do this? And I may say, no, look, I'm going to be in Bora Bora on Sunday. I wish. But Shayla might be able to do it. And Shayla might go, that's cool. No worries. So we're establishing those expectations, before it actually happens. It might happen if you've got a big event happening or a big sales pitch or, a big project and a financial year, audits, all of those things that actually go into taking up a big chunk of time for a short period in time, establishing the expectations. Misuse of disconnect policies by employees. Is it weird to say I'm actually excited by that? Because it is weird, isn't it? I think because I generally feel that employers, you know, they've had such a huge raft of changes, and I feel that there's so much that employers have to be accountable for. And sometimes it feels like employees potentially don't have to be accountable for their own actions sometimes. I'm not saying that all the time. I'm not, you know, I'm just, at the moment, it feels like a lot from the employer's side. Employees being able to be held accountable if they are demonstrating behaviours like that are in breach of guidelines and policy, but also if they are demonstrating behaviours that they are making complaints about other people doing the same. Double standards, you know. So the misuse of the disconnect policies, it can go wrong for employees. And again, if we don't have the guidelines, the expectations, and we're not leading by example, then we are going to find it hard to keep employees accountable. Confusion due to constant workplace changes. All right, you know, we go from 5 days a week to 4 days a week. You know, so we condense. We've seen all of the, you know, the great stuff that's happening about changing work weeks. That's fantastic, awesome. But is there an expectation to work on the 5th day, like to be contactable on the 5th day?
Have to set those expectations.
That's exactly right. We might go from 5-day trading to 5.5-day trading in busy periods, or we might go to 7-day trading. We might have an international company buy us out. Time zones. My manager might be on the other side of the planet, and so I'm getting emails from that person all through the morning because that's their normal work time. It's not my normal work time, but it's theirs. Does that mean that there's actually a right to disconnect issue? Well, potentially not if we set those expectations, all right? So where things change, or where your workplace changes, your hours of work change, etc., you need to be in constant communication and consultation, and you need to update your guidelines.
Definitely. Yeah. Which kind of brings us to the next point.
Where will it go wrong if we do nothing and we just hope? You can't assume it all goes well. Yes. You know, if we just cross our fingers, this is not a good plan, as my dad would say. You know, Lotto is not a good wealth creation plan. Doing nothing is not a good right to connect strategy. So I think that sort of goes without saying. All right, so that sort of leads us past the right to disconnect. I do believe that now I understand what the post-it note was these are the slides that don't have the last little bit that I wanted to talk about, which is the upcoming changes that are still in the pipeline. So the right of disconnect is obviously one of them, starting in August. We've been given an updated timeline, which we can send out to all the participants. It's on the Fair Work Ombudsman's webpage. It's a timeline that they've actually sort of put together, and it maps out all of these bigger changes that are happening. One thing that I did want to make a note of, it's not on the timeline. It's only just been heard, which means it's in discussion, I think, in the Senate, etc., that there's a move to make non-compete clauses unenforceable, or I'll use the word illegal, but, you know, sort of criminal jurisdiction. So that's one to watch. Restraint of trade clauses are very commonly used, or non-compete clauses, but there seems to be this move now to make them prohibited content, for want of a better word. So that's a watch this space. The other one that I really wanted to quickly touch on is the changes to casual employment. 26th of August 2024 for everybody, small businesses, large businesses. All right, it's been prompted as this huge change to casual employment. It's not a huge change, okay? But there is one key change. So essentially, what is a casual employee? It is saying that they are introducing a new definition. I'm yet to see what's new in the definition compared to the definition, like definition 2.0.
Which wasn't that long ago.
Definitely different to definition 1.0. Yeah. Then we had definition 2.0, which is essentially where there was no firm advance commitment to employment, where there was an irregular and unsystematic basis to their engagement. They were being paid a casual employment loading. The definition that they have put out essentially is if there isn't a firm advance commitment to continuing and indefinite work, taking into account a number of factors, including the real substance, practical reality, and true nature of the employment relationship.
A bit of a grey area.
It's a grey area. What
does that mean?
What it's trying to do is close the loop. You like what I did there? Tied that in because we're closing the loop all over the place. It's trying to say employers can't just say there's a no firm advance commitment. Oh, we don't think we're going to have any work for you past next month. When we look at the real substance, the practical reality, like what projects does this business have on their books, etc., and the true nature of the employment relationship. Right. So it's trying to just tighten up on the fact of employers being able to say there is no firm advance commitment. And they're entitled to receive a casual loading or a specific casual rate of pay. So essentially, that's the new definition. The key, and I think this is great, this is really, really good for employers. An employee, a casual employee, can stay as a casual employee until their employment status changes. That seems pretty straightforward. And it will change either through a conversion process, so that's your casual conversion, that bit's still there, or a Fair Work Commission order. So the Fair Work Commission, if it goes that far, and you hope it never would, they can order a casual conversion, or they're accepting an alternative offer of employment that could be part-time or full-time. The kicker is it is essentially employee choice. That may seem like a bad thing, all right? But what it is moving to is rather than the employer having to offer casual conversion in accordance with the award, in accordance with the national employment standards, and everything else that's out there, there's currently a requirement that either after 6 or 12 months, depending on if you're looking at the award or the NES, small business, large business, etc., the employer has to offer. Okay, that bit is essentially being removed.
That's so good for employers.
It's so good for employers. What it means is the employee has to ask. Okay, so that doesn't mean that as the employer you can't offer. That doesn't mean that you don't offer. You may have very valid reasons as to why you do want to offer it. That's still, you can still do that process, but it's not a legal requirement. So it means if you miss doing it, you're not going to be hung and reported because you've missed doing it. All right, it is up to the employee to request. Okay, and they've even put in some guidelines about how often an employee can actually request.
That's good. Some parameters.
Some parameters about, because so often I have clients that I can pretty much guarantee, right? We get the phone calls probably in around about mid-March. Or we get the phone calls after July financial year. And it's like, okay, my employee wants to go casual after July. Then they ring again and they in March and they go, no, they want permanent employment. Why do you think that is?
Because of the pay increases and the different annual leave, sick leave requirements that they get to have.
A truckload of public holidays. And it happens because they can capitalize on being paid for public holidays as a permanent employee, but not as a casual employee. So they're, and employers are getting really frustrated because they're like, how often do I have to change this? So we actually now have some clearer guidelines that employees will be able to notify their employer that they have an intention to want to convert, right? If they have been employed for at least 6 months or 12 months for a small business, if they believe they no longer meet the definition of a casual employee. Okay. Employees can notify their employer of their intention. Sorry, employees can't notify their intention to change if they are currently engaged in an ongoing dispute with their employer about casual conversion. If in the preceding 6 months or the last 6 months, their employer has refused a previous notification or a previous request, or they've resolved a dispute with their employer about casual conversion.
So what if you offer me casual conversion and I say, no, I want to stay casual, but then a month later I say, actually, no, I want to go permanent?
Look, I don't want to say 100% that I know the answer to that just yet. I would say that there's probably likelihood that there may be a grounds for the employer to say, well, no, we offered this to you a month ago, nothing's changed, no, I'm not going to do it. Don't quote me on that. Like, I want to see a bit more guts around the legislation first. Or it may very well be that the employer goes, yeah, we actually thought that was a good idea in the first place. Thanks for catching up, and let's make the transition.
Perfect.
Okay, so that is very much a watch this space. But I think having some parameters about when employees can make their requests is really good from an employer perspective, because we sort of get stuck. Can we reject a request? Yes, we absolutely can, but we need to be able to demonstrate that the employee still meets the definition of casual. There are fair and reasonable operational grounds for not accepting the notification, which may include if there are substantial changes to the business that are going to happen, which is going to prevent a firm in advance ongoing commitment of work. If there would be significant impacts on the operation of the employee's business, it's a bit debatable, but you know, it's in there as one of the reasons. Substantial changes to the employee's employment conditions would be unreasonably necessary to ensure the employer doesn't break any other rules in the award or the agreement. That could be like, you know, you might have a casual employee who's working 3 hours every Monday to come in and dust the ceilings, all right, and they want to go part-time, and they put in a request and they want to go part-time. The part-time, like, let's just say the part-time minimum engagement, for example, or there might be something that the employer can't adhere to under the award for a part-time employee using that arrangement. Right, so that could be a reasonable grounds for refusal. Accepting the change means the employer isn't complying with the recruitment or selection process as required by law or their own internal policies. So let's actually have a look at, we'll go back and have a bit of a conversation around what is a firm advance commitment to employment, the factors that they're talking about, okay? So where there is a firm advance commitment to continuing and indefinite work needs to be assessed on the real substance, practical reality, and the true nature of the employment relationship. Several other factors. That's what it says.
Clear as mud.
Clear as mud, absolutely. So the other factors, what they do go on to say is the other factors must be considered include whether the employer can offer or not offer work to the employee, and whether this is happening. So are we actually already offering them full-time hours, but we're still calling them casual, and then we turn around and say, oh no, that we can't give you conversion.
That's not good.
Are we publishing rosters that are 3-4 months out in advance and still calling them casual? You know, we're probably dancing on the definition there, I would say. Whether the employee wants to retain a right to accept or reject work.
All that flexibility again,
all that flexibility, you know, that you might have a casual employee says, no, I want to be part-time, but I still want to be able to pick and choose whether I,
doesn't work both ways.
Can't work both ways. Can't have your cake and eat it too. Is it reasonably likely that there will be future work available? And keep in mind that if a dispute did go to the Fair Work Commission, the Fair Work Commission can actually delve into what is your work pipeline. So they've got a few more, I guess, teeth to be able to ask for additional information, which potentially, could be commercial and confidence information. So you really don't want to be in the Fair Work Commission, having the Fair Work Commission make these decisions for you if you can avoid it. Are there already existing full-time and part-time employees doing the same job?
It's not really fair if you're offering it to some and not others.
That's right, or we're saying no because there's not enough hours. So we've already got the hours being done by the casual employee in the first instance. And the age-old kicker, the employee has a regular pattern of work. You know, we know full well that the market definition of casual or the industry definition of casual probably still doesn't meet the legislative definition. It never has. And even with these changes, there's still a disconnect in how we, as an industry, particularly up here in Queensland, where we're very reliant on tourism, etc., treat our casuals. So I think the onus of the employer having to do casual conversion being removed is actually a big green tick win for employers, which I'm pleased about.
Definitely.
Yeah. Okay, so that is essentially all the content that we had today. I know it was a lot. If you do have any questions that you would like us to run through, we're happy to answer those for you. We'll give it a couple of minutes. Otherwise, questions stay on if you're ready to leave us for the day. Thanks for joining us. We hope that we've been giving you some information that has been helpful. My apologies for the whole technical thing at the start of this. This is why I should not be in charge of technology. We got there with the wrong slides, but that's okay. We still got there. So I do apologize for that. Let's have a look. We have got questions coming through. Again, I should not be allowed to control this. Oh, we've got a thanks from Christina. I thought it was a question. I was getting really excited. We've got a question from, oh, hi, Kat. Just to confirm, employees can make a request at 6 months, 12 months, and then every 12 months thereafter. That would depend on if you are a small business or a large business. Kat, you being a large business, that is probably going to be, let me go back to my little notes here. They can request it if they have been employed for at least 6 months or 12 months as a small business employer. So for you, that's going to be a large business. So it's going to be on a 6 monthly sort of interval. So in a nutshell, I think it's once every 6 months for you guys. They're not going to be able to ask if in the last 6 months they've had it refused or they've resolved a dispute with the employer about casual conversion. So I think in a nutshell, once every 6 months. Cool. Any other question? You can control that because it is not my area of specialty.
I think that was the last one for now.
Is that one more?
Just to think.
Perfect. Well, if you've got questions that sort of spring to mind after you've hung up from the webinar, by all means, get in touch with us. Our email address is on the screen there. You can also contact us via our website, or you can Google the number. You know, we're on the interweb essentially. You can find us. Interweb. Oh, see, that's how old I am. You know, this is why I don't do technology well.
I'll be sure to let Nick know for next time.
Yeah, it'll be in my performance review for sure. All right, guys, thanks so much for joining us. We hope it was informative and we look forward to seeing you soon. Have a good day.
Thanks, guys. Bye.